As a nurse, and more so as a mother, how could I have not seen the warning signs? How could I have not seen that my own son was filled with so much pain and sadness? How could I have not been there to protect him from taking his life? These are the questions I continue to ask myself today. So I hope that by sharing our family's story, warning signs of suicide will be on your radar and that you will be more prepared to help save a life. So in 2007, let's get my slides going here. In 2007, my son Chris was a 17-year-old high school senior. College bound, he was active in sports and church, and he worked part-time at Target. He was quick-witted and impulsive and a friend to many. His friends described him as charismatic, comical, and a dependable friend. His best friend shared this story about Chris at his service. Collins said, Chris was a remarkable friend who shedded his childhood lisp and actually had a deeper voice than most middle-aged men, which was a trait that proved valuable in more instances than one in our group of friends. Sometimes he would call a younger kid's parents, pretending he was also a parent, to make it possible for one of our friends to stay out just a little bit later. This was very representative of Chris's attitude, just always wanting everyone to be together and having fun. Well, as I said, Chris was an impulsive kid, which on most days served him well. However, not on January 11th, 2007, a day that has changed our lives forever. Today, we know more than we knew then about what Chris was experiencing at the time. There had been a breakup with a girl who decided to date one of Chris's friends. We did not know that he was feeling humiliated by what had happened. As a Christmas gift just a few weeks prior to his Chris received 2 tickets to a Wild game for the first week of January. And he decided to take me instead of taking his friends. Now, Chris and I were close, but this was very out of character for him, because at that time in his life, when he was just 17 years old, there wasn't anything more precious to him than his buddies. Everyone thought it was so sweet that Chris wanted to take his mom to the game. We did not know that he was saying his goodbyes. The night before his death, he was at Armstrong High School having a great time playing intramural basketball with his friends. We did not know until much later that after the game that night, he gave his favorite pair of basketball shoes to his friend Tom. And we did not know that on his way home from the game that night, he stopped by Target where he worked part-time. His friend Ryan would tell me months later that something just didn't seem quite right with Chris that night. And we did not know that Chris was feeling anxious about leaving for college that fall and wasn't sure that he wanted to go. So my son's death shocked our entire community. No one, not our family, his friends, people in school, or the church community saw it coming. So this has now become a big part of our work through the Christopher Benz Foundation, which aims to connect Minnesota communities in the prevention of suicide by providing resources and education. We initially felt very isolated and alone, and we felt the stigma of suicide and the shame. However, we quickly realized that my son's death affected everyone. No one was untouched, and we all experienced the profound pain and deep sadness together. Our hope is that through our work with the Christopher Benz Foundation and our connections with communities and organizations throughout Minnesota, such as PrairieCare, NAMI, and Canvas Health, that we can help make a difference to prevent suicide and that lives can be saved. We hope that intervening and saving a life from suicide will become common knowledge, as common as CPR has become over the years. And we hope that all people will come to know the warning signs and how to act to save a life and eliminate deaths by suicide in Minnesota. So that's just a little preface as we kind of move into our QPR training. QPR was Question, Persuade, Refer was developed by Dr. Paul Quinnett of the QPR Institute, which is an educational organization dedicated to preventing suicide. Dr. Quinnett is an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Science at the University of Washington School of Medicine in Seattle, and has over 30 years of clinical experience working with suicidal patients. And I received my certification as a QPR instructor in January of this year. So the objectives of the training really are to that QPR recognizes that we're all connected and we all live in communities. We all shop at grocery stores. We work, so we're connected with our coworkers. We have families. We go to the pharmacy. So we're all connected in some way where we live. It teaches us how to recognize a real crisis, and we're going to go through those warning signs at the beginning of the presentation. And like CPR, QPR is a skill that everybody can learn. So our goal is in Minnesota is really to spread QPR training throughout the state so that increase people's knowledge of the warning signs and what to do when they encounter someone who's experiencing a suicidal crisis. And so this increases the possibility of an early intervention, which can save lives. Our objectives then are to increase awareness about suicide. We hope that you'll leave knowing more about the warning signs of suicide, that you'll leave with a few resources that maybe you didn't have when you came in, and that you will learn the 3 easy steps or skills that can help save a life. So I wanted to talk just a little bit, excuse me, about suicide in Minnesota particularly. So this just shows the rate of increase of suicide in Minnesota. Sue Abderholden referred to that in her previous presentation, but suicide in this state has risen 29% over the last decade, and this is the last 10 years. These statistics are from the Minnesota Department of Health. So this slide shows suicide rates by age groups. Adult suicide rates are highest among our middle-aged people, aged 25 to 64, and particularly middle-aged men are at highest risk, and they've been steadily increasing over the last decade. Youth rates and the older adults rates have stayed fairly stable, although you can see on the top line, the red is the people age 65 and older. There was a increase from 2010 to 2011. And even though the youth rates have stayed fairly stable, suicide in Minnesota is the second leading cause of death for our young people, those under the age of 25, which is different than it is for the rest of the nation. The national average for suicide rates for that age group is the third leading cause of death. So we have some work to do here in Minnesota. Just some facts and figures that I want to go through in regards to suicide, and these come from the Centers for Disease Control. And both these rates and the rates from the Minnesota Department of Health are from 2013. Those are the most recent rates that we have. So in this country, there's about 48,000 deaths by suicide in 2013. That means that someone dies in this country about every 12.8 minutes from suicide, which means that in about the hour that we're going to be here doing this training, that 4.6 people will die just in the hour that we're here together. As I said, the highest rate of suicide is in those aged 45 to 64, and particularly middle-aged men. And our second highest rate is 85 years and older. For this age group, their attempts, as you can see later on in this slide, our older citizens, their attempt rate is 4 attempts to every death, which compares to, in our youth, those under age 25, there's 25 attempts for every death. So in our older citizens, our older community members, when they decide that suicide is the way that they're going to die, they're very good at completing that death. Men die by more often by suicide than women do. And let me see if I have that. In 2013, 77.9% of the deaths were male and 22.1% of the deaths were women. And we've all heard a lot about the increasing rates of suicide among our veterans. So Montana, Alaska, Utah, Wyoming, New Mexico, Idaho, Nevada, Colorado, South Dakota have the highest suicide rates. and the District of Columbia, New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts, and Connecticut have the lowest suicide rates. So you might be thinking, well, why is that, huh? And so those states that have lower suicide rates have stronger gun laws. And in this state, in Minnesota, in 2013, 80% of the people that died by guns, they died from suicide. 80% of those deaths were suicide related. So I wanted to talk just for a minute about the S word, or the word suicide. We talked in the last presentation, the Make It Okay presentation, about stigma. And there is a lot of stigma around suicide as well. So why do we think that, why don't we talk about suicide? Or why is this something we don't talk about in our communities or our families? Do you have thoughts about that? Shame. There's a lot of shame around suicide. So oftentimes, although I think we're getting better at that, I'm starting to see in the obituaries that when someone dies from suicide, we're starting to see that in the obituaries that people are naming that. I wasn't that courageous when my son died. We just, the obituary was pretty nondescript. It just said that he died on a certain date and listed who his family members were, but there's a lot of shame around that. My experience with that is that suicide, talking about it, you can either really open up a conversation if you happen to be with someone else who's experienced suicide of a family member, loved one, or a friend, or it can really shut that conversation down. So you oftentimes feel, kind of excluded from the conversation when we're talking about suicide. So we have a lot to do because it affects a lot of people. So we're going to spend a little bit of time before we get to the 3 steps of just going through some of the myths and the facts about suicide. So the first one is that no one can stop a suicide. It's inevitable. And the fact is that if people in a crisis get help that they need, they will probably never be suicidal again. There's studies that show that many suicide attempts are unplanned and occur during acute period of ambivalence. So suicidal behavior is really, that's a crisis-oriented time when that death really occurs, and that crisis is pretty short-lived. Now, it may be preceded by long periods of depression or other mental illnesses or other things going on, but that decision from the time a person decides to take their life and that the death actually occurs is really short-lived. So we really want to make it hard. We want to intervene. We can intervene, and we're going to learn the steps to do that. But we want to make it hard for people to, complete their suicide at that time. And we'll talk about means restrictions, and we don't want to, if we have guns in the house, we want to lock those up. We actually want to get them out of the house, limit access to medications and other lethal means. Because if people can get through that period of crisis, if they have to get in their car or get on their bike to go find some medications or go find a weapon or a means to do that, that may be just enough time to get them through that suicidal crisis and may save their life. And it's interesting, the public's perception on that. I was interviewed a few years ago about my son's death, and he died by a firearm. And it was printed in the St. Paul paper. And I happened to go online to read the paper, and I think the mistake I made was reading the comments that were made online, because there were a lot of comments about, well, if someone wants to die, no one's going to stop them. So there's this kind of public opinion out there that we can't do anything to intervene, and that's just not true. Confronting a person about suicide will only make them angry and increase the risk. So there's kind of this fear that, well, we don't want to talk about it, do we? We were doing this training up in northern Minnesota with about 200 youth at a baseball tournament, and I had one of the coaches and one of the players come up and do a role play with me. So I kind of walked them through and said, here's what we're going to do. And the coach, who was also a K through 12 educator, he said, well, I said, at some point in the role play, you be able to ask the question, are you thinking about suicide? And he said, well, we don't really want to say the word, do we? And we absolutely do. We absolutely want to be very clear and direct in our communication. So research shows that asking someone about suicide will not cause suicide. In fact, it lowers their anxiety and it really opens up the communication because now they know that someone cares. So it really begins that connection and really starts offering them hope. And when they can find hope, hope can save lives. So we never hesitate to talk to our kids, do we, about maybe driving or texting or driving or drinking. We don't hesitate to bring up those subjects. And we need to be able to get to a place in our lives where we're able to sit down and have those conversations with our loved ones about suicide as well and not hesitate about that. And the third one here is that only experts can prevent suicide. Suicide is a very preventable death, and it's everyone's responsibility. So I don't think there's any place we can go now where we don't find AEDs in public places, right? So we need to get to the point where all of our public is trained in regards to suicide prevention and that people can intervene. Suicidal people keep their plans to themselves. So research shows that 90% of people who die from suicide have made, there's been communication about their plans or their intentions prior to their death. And we're going to look a little bit later in the presentation about what those suicidal communications look like. And those people who talk about suicide don't do it. Actually, of the people who do send suicidal communications that they were planning to make a suicide attempt, 5% of that group actually goes on to die from suicide. So not all suicidal communication indicates that someone is going to follow through with an attempt, but suicidal communication is a distress call. So we need to be really clear about that. So if once we learn these, if you hear these things and observe these, it is a distress call, and so we need to intervene with everything. It's just like if somebody was sitting next to you and they were having chest pain. We wouldn't ignore that just because they weren't laying on the floor having a full heart attack. And once a person decides to complete a suicide, there's nothing anyone can do to stop them. Suicide is very preventable. So the fact that many suicide attempts are unplanned, we can really do a lot to restrict lethal means, which is a key strategy for suicide prevention. So we're going to spend the next few minutes talking about what those suicide clues and warning signs are and some of the contributing factors to suicide. And then we'll learn the first step about how to ask the question. So these are some of the things that you might hear people say, and these are very direct. So if people say these sort of things, you really don't have to guess what's on their mind. I've decided to kill myself. I wish I were dead. I'm going to commit suicide, or I'm going to end it all. If such and such doesn't happen, I'm going to kill myself. These are very direct clues or communications, and that person is really telling us what they're thinking. These, on the other hand, are more indirect, and I kind of think of them as more of a detour, kind of like our Minnesota roads are in the metro this summer. We can't get from here to there. We have to kind of go different ways. So if people are saying these sort of things, we really need to take time and spend more time to figure out what's the message here and what's this person telling us. I'm tired of life and I just can't go on. Or my family would be better off without me. Who cares if I'm dead anyways? I just want out. I won't be around much longer. Pretty soon you won't have to worry about me, and I should have never been born. So I'm just going to share a short little story about when I worked at a healthcare organization in the Twin Cities. One of my coworkers came in one day and asked me, she said, I'm really not feeling well, I'd like to go home. Now normally I would just say, yeah, you should go home and take care of yourself. But there was just something about her that day, and I'm gonna, for the sake of the presentation, I'm gonna call her Nancy. And there was just something about Nancy that just didn't seem quite right, so I asked her to come in and sit down. And so I came out from around my desk and sat next to her. And as we talked more, she said, I just want to go home and go to sleep and never wake up. So I'm not a mental health expert, but I had some really good resources available. So I was able to get a crisis counselor on the phone who spent time with Nancy on the phone and myself. And then we were able to get Nancy to one of the local hospitals to get the help that she needed. She came back to work about 3 weeks later, and she was so grateful that someone was there and that we didn't let her go home that day. So you really need to pay attention to what your intuitive self is telling you, because we all have those gut feelings in life, and we need to pay attention to those. And we need to really explore what the real message is that people are telling us. So there's behavioral clues. And remember that other slide a few back. So the more warning signs you see, so any one of these things by themselves may not be a sign that this person's going to try to kill themselves, but the more signs that you have, the higher the risk the person has. So some warning behavioral clues, if there's been a previous suicide attempt, and I think, let's see, the studies show that if a person has had a previous attempt, they're at 20% higher risk of attempting again. People, if somebody suddenly acquired a gun or they're stockpiling pills, we want to pay attention to that. And like I said, we really want to get those things out of the house. We want to get the gun out of the house, have another family member keep it and lock it up, or a neighbor, and get the ammunition out of the house as well. If there's history of depression, moodiness, hopelessness or unexplained anger, aggression, or irritability. So really any change in behavior that you've noticed in someone. People that are putting their personal affairs in order or giving prized possessions. We want to pay attention to that. A sudden interest or disinterest in religion. I've done this training often get a lot of requests from the faith communities in the metro area. And so I always tell them, if somebody's been in church every Sunday and all of a sudden they're not there, we really need to check in on those people and see what's going on. Drug or alcohol abuse, or if there's been a relapse, puts people at higher risk. And then there's situational clues as well. So being fired or expelled from school can contribute to a person's risk. A recent unwanted move. It could be a younger person, maybe a family's moved them here, because of a job change. Maybe it's a family member who lives, in their own home. I think of my mother, it was her decision. She recently sold her home and moved into an assisted living. But if it's a unwanted move, we need to think about those people who maybe their kids or grandkids are saying, well, no, we're going to move mom from her home now into an assisted living or a long-term care facility, because that's a major loss, isn't it? If there's been a death of a spouse, a child, best friend, especially if it's by suicide. The month my son died on January 11th, and exactly 30 days later, on February 12th, my 54-year-old sister died, and she was in hospice. So it was a very stressful time. But watch for those sorts of stressors in people's lives. Diagnosis of a serious illness or terminal illness, if there's been a sudden unexpected loss of freedom, or fear of punishment can be stressors, financial difficulties, and fear of becoming a burden to others. My years of working in hospice, that was really one of the biggest fears people and concerns that people have at that part of their life, that they don't want to be a burden to their children and to others. So this kind of gets into tips for asking the question. So if and the question we're going to ask is that, are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about killing yourself? So if in doubt, we don't want to wait. We want to ask that question. And if that person doesn't really want to sit down and talk to you, we want to be persistent. We don't want to just let it go and say, well, I'll check in with them next week, because next week might not be here. We want to use our good skills. We want to talk to that person alone. make sure we have plenty of time, make sure we have a private setting to do that. And we want to make sure you'll have your resources ready. So you're going to leave with some resources today. I always encourage people when some of the resources have phone numbers you can call. I'd put those right in, and we all have our cell phones. You know, put those contact numbers right in your cell phones. You will use them. And remember that how you ask the question is less important than the fact that you ask that question. So it's really about getting involved in people's lives. When you see that the warning signs are there and you have a concern about somebody, it's taking the time to get involved. And as I travel a lot this summer, and as I go through these busy airports, I see people are rushing. And you know, we don't often stop and get involved when we see somebody that we're concerned about. So these are just some of the ways you can ask that question. This is a less direct approach. You know, have you been unhappy lately? Have you been very unhappy lately? Have you been so very unhappy lately that you've been thinking about ending your life? So it kind of comes around to asking that. Or do you ever wish you could go to sleep and never wake up? Which was like my friend Nancy. This is a more direct approach. Some examples. You know, when people are as upset as you seem to be, they sometimes wish they were dead. And I'm wondering if you're feeling that way too. Or you look pretty miserable. I wonder if you're thinking about suicide. Or are you thinking about killing yourself? So the important thing is that we get to the point where we're able to ask the question. I know I've been with groups and sometimes they say, they'll say, well, I've asked, and I've said, well, are you thinking about hurting yourself? And so if you start out that way, you want to remember that for that suicidal person who's having that thoughts, they're experiencing so much emotional pain and suffering that ending their life to them, they're thinking that may make things better because it's going to end the pain and suffering that they're experiencing. So be careful if you ask somebody, are you thinking about hurting yourself? And make sure you then come full circle and get to that point where you ask them, are you thinking about killing yourself? And if you're not able to ask that question because it kind of sticks in your throat, make sure you find someone who can ask the question. So this is the way we don't want to ask the question. We don't want to say, you're not suicidal, are you? Because now we've already answered it for them, haven't we? So this is a video that Mayo Clinic has put together. It's really focused on youth, but it does a really nice job of talking about those warning signs and how to respond to that. So I'm just going to...
I have my ups and downs, just like anybody else.
Maybe more than anybody else.
I can be hard to figure out.
And I like my privacy.
I don't want you looking over my shoulder all the time.
But you know your kid better than anybody else. And if you think he's acting different than usual...
Acting really down, crying all the time for no good reason.
Or getting really mad. Not able to sleep, or sleeping too much.
Shutting her friends out or giving her stuff away.
Acting reckless, drinking, using drugs, staying out late.
Suddenly not doing stuff he used to love.
Or doing stuff that's just not like him.
It might be nothing to worry about. It might just be high school.
Or it might be something more. He might be depressed.
Not just feeling down, really depressed.
It might be that your kid is thinking about killing himself.
It happens. More than you think. More than it should.
And people say, I had no idea.
I thought it was just a phase he was going through.
I never thought she'd do it.
I wish he'd come to me.
I wish he'd said something.
I wish I'd said something.
When it's too late. So if you think your kid's acting different, if she seems like a different person, say something.
Say, what's wrong? How can I help?
And ask straight out. Are you thinking about killing yourself? It doesn't hurt to ask. In fact, it helps.
When people are thinking about killing themselves, they want somebody to ask.
They want somebody to care.
Maybe you're afraid you'll make it worse if you ask. Like, you'll put the idea in their head.
Believe me, it doesn't work that way.
It doesn't hurt to ask.
In fact, the best way to keep a teenager from killing herself is to ask, are you thinking about killing yourself?
And what if they say yes?
Or maybe.
Or sometimes.
Well, here's what you don't say.
That's crazy.
Don't be such a drama queen.
You're making too much of this.
That boy's not worth killing
Yourself.
over.
That's not going to solve anything.
You're just trying to get attention.
You're not going to kill yourself.
What you do say is,
I'm sorry you're feeling so bad. How can I help?
We'll get through this together.
Let's keep you safe.
A lot of people think about killing themselves. adults and kids.
Most of them never try it, but some of them do. So if your kid says,
I'd be better off dead.
I can't live with
I'm
this.
gonna kill myself,
Take her seriously. Find someone she can talk to about it. Someone who knows how to help.
Sometimes kids want to kill themselves because something happened. A breakup, a failure.
But sometimes it goes deeper, and it's not going to go away by itself.
Get some help. Talk to your doctor.
Or a counselor at school.
Or your minister.
but don't just let it drop.
And make sure that your kid always has someone to turn to. Someone he trusts.
Make a list together right then. 3, 4, 5 names.
Put a suicide hotline number on there too.
Have him keep that list in his wallet so he always knows where to turn.
Make sure your home is safe.
If you have pills she could use to hurt herself, lock them up.
If you have a gun, don't just lock it up. Get it out of the house. The bullets, too.
And one more thing. If you think your kid might be about to hurt himself, don't leave him alone.
Take him to the emergency room.
Call 911 if you have to.
We all have our ups and downs, but sometimes it's more than that.
If you think something's wrong, the only way to find out is to ask.
Ask straight out. Are you thinking about killing yourself?
Don't wait until you're sure. Trust your gut.
Because it never hurts to ask.
And it can make a big difference.
All the difference.
In your kid's life.
Because there's that widespread misconception that if we say the word suicide or we talk about it, that it's going to cause someone to take their life, and we know that that's just not true. So when we ask the question, so teenagers can be especially resistant to intervention, but it's often because they're at that age and they don't trust adults. So we need to just keep trying with that group. And then it's always the question, well, what if we get a yes? What if somebody, so what if, the person you're talking to and you say, well, are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking of suicide? And what if they say yes? Well, we're not going to do any sort of psychiatric interview because we're not qualified to do that. Now, there might be some people in the room today that are, but I'm not qualified to do that. So we're not going to do that. But what we're going to do is we're going to use our resources and get that person help. So that's really the key to the training. So we're going to move on to the next step of the QPR, which is the Persuade part. And so the good news about this step in the training is that you all already are experts about persuasion. I can guarantee you that all of us in our life have needed to persuade somebody to do something that they probably didn't really want to do. We've probably persuaded our kids to join an activity or stick with an activity. I know last year I persuaded my husband to have his first colonoscopy. He didn't really want to do that, but I was successful in persuading him to do that. So we are good at persuasion, and we all have those skills. And it really begins, the art of persuasion begins by developing that positive relationship with whoever you're working with. So it's using your active listening skills, letting that person know that you're concerned. You really are concerned about them, and that you're there to help them. So it's having that sincere interest. So we want to listen to the problem and give them our full attention, just like Carol did. And we want to remember that suicide's not the problem, but it is their solution to what a perceived insolvable problem is. Remember, that person is really filled with a lot of emotional pain. And there's no judgment in this. We don't want to rush to judgment, but we really want to offer hope in any form, because hope saves lives. So here's some words you might use when you're trying to persuade someone. Let me help you. Will you go with me to get help? I care about you, and I want to make sure that you're okay and that you're safe. I'm sorry that you're going through this. And there is help and there is hope. And I want you to live. I'm on your side, and I'm going to help you through this, and we'll get through it together. So those are all good words that we can use, and there's many, many more. But your willingness to listen and to help can really rekindle that hope that people need, and it can make all the difference. So the last personal story I'm going to share is actually about the other trainer in our foundation, my partner, Maria Willits, who lives up in northern Minnesota. and it's about her son Ricky, who died from suicide in 2009 when he was a senior in high school. And the week prior to his death, Ricky came into Maria's bedroom one night. She was reading, and he came in and he had this picture. And so he'd drawn her this picture. And so like any good mom, you know, she looked at the picture and she just told him how incredible it was, what a gifted artist he is, and just how much she loved that picture. You know, and she said, and then there, you know, after a while there became some awkwardness because he still just kind of stood there while she had that picture in her hand. And she said, well, you know, she says, I'm going to put it right up here on the shelf in my bedroom so that when I wake up every morning I can see your beautiful artwork. And so he just kind of shook his head and he walked out of the room. Well, Ricky died the next week from suicide. And like so many teenagers, he had communicated his plans to his friends, but at that age his friends kept his secret. And so he didn't get the help he needed. He suffered from an undiagnosed depression. So in the weeks after Ricky's death, Maria was going through her house and gathering his things, because when you lose a child to suicide, all we really have left are their precious things. And when she got into her bedroom, she saw the picture on her shelf, and so she took it down. And that morning, the sun was coming through the window in just a way that she could see that there was something on the back of the picture, which she hadn't seen that evening when Ricky had brought it into her room. And when she turned it over, this was what was on the back. And if you can't see from the back, it's a bottle. It's a bottle, Ricky's bottle of hope, and his hope is running out. So on the right side of it, that says hope, 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 hope. Ricky's hope was nearly gone. And when he stood in her bedroom that night, he didn't have the resilience or the strength to let his mother know that he was in trouble and he needed help. So hope, offering hope through the persuasion, the QPR, when you sit down and talk to someone, just like we did in the role play, you can really rekindle hope, and hope saves lives. So the last step in the training is the referral part. Suicidal people often believe that they can't be helped because they're running out of hope and their resilience has run low. So the last step is to really use your resources and get people the help that they need. And I say the best referral is one that's hand-delivered. Much as my friend Nancy, we were able to just get her right over to the hospital. When I'm on campus at St. Catherine's, if I have a student I'm concerned with, I walk them over to the counseling center. So that is the preferred way to get people help. You use your resources and you get others involved. You're not in this alone. So make sure that you ask the person that you're working with who else might help them. You know, in the Mayo video, they talked about having the kids write down the names of three or four people who they would trust and who could help. So it might be a physician, a counselor, family, friends, pastors, parish nurses, teachers, but who else can be part of that network, so you don't have to be alone in providing this. And then use your crisis resources. And you're going to leave here today with a wallet card that has the warning signs on the back of it, with the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number. That's a great number to use. There's a new program through Canvas Health called Text for Life, which is really a useful tool if you're working with youth and younger people. And then the mobile crisis teams. So that larger card that I gave you has the crisis teams printed on the back of the card for the metro area. And if you call those numbers, those crisis teams will meet you at your home, your place of work, and they'll be very effective. And then this website has a list of other prevention crisis numbers throughout the state of Minnesota. So I talked a little bit about Canvas Health. This is their Text for Life. You just, on your cell phone, you enter the word life into the subject line, and then you text that to 61222, and you just wait a few seconds, and a crisis worker at Canvas Health, at the Crisis Connection down in Richfield, will start that conversation over text. So that's very effective. The other thing I want to mention is so many of us are on Facebook these days, and Facebook has done a good job of improving monitoring suicidal communication on Facebook, but we all need to be diligent about that. So if you see something, you need to say something, and Facebook has made it very easy for you to report that. It's just like you would report anything else. And so if you report something that you're concerned about someone on Facebook, that it might be suicidal communication, they will check that out. They have a safety team who will review that and they can intervene, but you'll also get a message back from Facebook and they'll let you know what happened in regards to that concern. So really, that is kind of the whole focus of the 3 steps. You now know how to ask the question, you know how to persuade people, and you can refer people using the resources that you have. I really would encourage you to put those resources, those contact numbers right into your cell phone so that you have them with you all the time. So remember, when you apply QPR, those 3 easy steps, you really plant those seeds of hope, and hope saves lives, so you can go out and save lives in your communities. So thank you.